More than 1,000 dead, thousands injured, and so many more still trapped under the rubble. Rescue efforts are underway after massive earthquakes strike southern Turkey and Syria. Crews battling bad weather are working frantically to pull people out from the debris. I'm Melinda Nusofora, and today's newsmaker is the earthquake in Turkey. Massive earthquakes have struck Turkey's southern province of Kahramanmaraş. In neighbouring provinces, the cities of Gaziantep and Diyarbakir have been amongst the hardest hit. Hundreds have died in Turkey alone, and the death toll keeps rising. Thousands of buildings have been damaged or destroyed, and rescue workers, as well as civilians, are scrambling to find survivors. This is one of the largest earthquakes to hit the region in the last 100 years. The first earthquake was quickly followed by hours of powerful aftershocks, the strongest measured well over 6 on the Richter scale. Shockwaves have been felt as far away as Lebanon and Israel. In Syria, hundreds have been confirmed dead, in parts of the country already struggling to cope with the continuing civil war. The Syrian American Medical Society says hospitals in Afrin and Aleppo are overwhelmed. Offers of support to Syria and Turkey have poured in from around the world. Joseph Borrell, the EU's most senior diplomat, has tweeted that the 27-country bloc is ready to assist Turkey and Syria, saying, "Devastating earthquake rocked Turkey and Syria this morning, claiming the lives of hundreds of people and injuring many more. Our thoughts are with the people of Turkey and Syria. The EU is ready to help." Meanwhile, on the ground, survivors are describing the horrors they experienced.
There are people still trapped under rubble. I have a friend living in this apartment. His children were rescued from the top floor, but only his daughter broke an arm. We will see what happened to those living on the ground floors. May God give us a speedy recovery.
I was sleeping when my wife suddenly woke me up. The quake was very severe, very scary. We were hearing sounds from all over the place. It took us 2 minutes until the shaking stopped.
There are 12 families trapped here, and no one managed to get out. They are all inside here. So far, no one has come here to see where people are. There is no civil defense. We have been working with our hands since 3 a.m.
We felt the quake. It was very strong, so we pulled out with the kids, with my wife, and ran directly towards the entrance of the house. It is known to get out of the building in such cases, and as we reached the entrance of the building, it collapsed totally on us. God saved us, and a wooden door fell on us, which saved us. My 3 kids are here with wounds in their heads and faces, and my daughter was saved without any injury.
Well, to break all this down and give us some expertise, we're joined from Antalya by Durmus Aydin, the Secretary General of IHH, the Humanitarian Relief Foundation. From Baku, Professor at Ankara University and Seismologist Bahadir Aktug, and from Perth, visiting Professor of the School of Earth and Planetary Sciences, Chris Elders. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time here on the Newsmakers. Durmus, I want to begin with you because the pictures of this rescue mission we are seeing out of Turkey is just phenomenal. How prepared is Turkey for a disaster like this? How prepared can any agency be for a mission of this scale?
Yeah, when we look at the magnitude of the earthquake, it's so huge. Now we're talking about the 7.7. It's really a huge magnitude. So, but I must tell you this, Turkey is for many years, they are trying to do preparations, especially the Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency, AFAD, was trying to do preparations for the earthquake. So a couple of years, they were trying to do some exercises all over the Turkey. Last 12th November, they did the exercises for the earthquake all over the Turkey. And they are trying to do some preparations. But we have to know that already we are living in a country. This is the life of earthquake. We have to be aware of that. So it should be continuous support or continuous awareness program should be carrying on for all over Turkey for the community. So, but when you look at the magnitude of the earthquake is so huge, and it is really affected a lot.
Durmus, how long would you anticipate this search and rescue phase to last? I mean, how long can a rescue mission last when you consider the really freezing temperatures that these areas are currently under?
Yeah, 72 hours. The first 72 hours are so important when the earthquake or such kind of disaster happen. So now we are running out of time. So all the research and rescue teams are trying to focus on the people who are under rubble. So they're trying to rescue them. But as you mentioned, the weather conditions so harsh and it's freezing. So from the previous experiences, we have seen that 5 days later or 7 days later, we have seen that some people we managed to escape them from the rubbles. So there is hope for that, but I can't tell you that when can we stop for the research and rescue programs. But at least like the 1 week is going to be continuous, and then there will be the recovery phase will be start.
Bahadir, if I can come to you now, how does this earthquake and how does the response to this earthquake compare to the 1999 disaster in Turkey?
Yeah, this earthquake occurred actually a similar mechanism with the Izmit earthquake occurred on the North Anatolian fault system. This one occurred on the East Anatolian fault system. They have similar tectonic regimes, structural regimes, but one is left lateral, one is right lateral. The one discriminating feature of this earthquake is this earthquake occurred in a region where seismicity is low. It means the strain accumulation is low, and it corresponds to longer intervals between large earthquakes. So then they are a bit not frequent with respect to those occurring on North Anatolian fault system. But also it could mean that it produces larger earthquakes, and this earthquake, in terms of moment magnitude, is larger than Izmit earthquake in 1999.
Chris, do you agree with that? I mean, Turkey as a whole, we always consider as being very earthquake prone, but would you agree that this region of Turkey is perhaps less prone than perhaps we are here in Istanbul?
No, exactly, that's correct. Historically, or in, let's say, recent history at least, there's been much more earthquake activity in, as you say, areas close to Istanbul and in the northern part of Turkey. This area is known to have a major fault within it, a boundary between some of the tectonic plates, and it's known to be an area of earthquake risk. But the level of seismicity has been much lower over recent history than elsewhere in Turkey.
Before we get back into Turkey specifically as well, Durmus, I want to come to you and ask about our neighbours in Syria. We know that a lot of the areas of Syria that have been really heavily affected are these opposition-held regions where millions of displaced Syrians are living. How is Syria coping? We're hearing the hospitals are already overwhelmed.
Yes, you're right, definitely. Our people, our teams now in the northern side of the Syria, we have sent 180 staff of IHH. Now they are trying to deliver the humanitarian aid. These are the areas, and I would like to mention the names like Harim, Sarmada, Atna, Kermanin, Etarif, Jinderes, Afrin, Buseyniye, Salkin. Those are the provinces are really affected. And now the given numbers, it's in total the opposition side and the regime side, almost 500 people, they lost their lives. These are the recent numbers. I mean, day by day it's increasing. So we are afraid that the numbers of the death will increase. So it's really a scary part. But the problem is now those people already affected by the war, and they do not have enough facilities to survive. And the hospitals and other facilities are so weak. So it's really harsh for those people to survive at the moment.
Bahadir, let's speak about Turkey in general. Why is this region so prone to earthquakes, and is there any way of predicting them?
Yeah, actually, Turkey lies in a region of earthquake stripes, let's say earthquake zones, large earthquake zones. And this zone is, although quiet for a few hundreds years, it's also prone to large earthquakes. We know from historical records that the earthquake already produced large earthquakes similar to those we have seen today. Both North Anatolian Fault System and East Anatolian Fault System, and they are also the boundaries of tectonic plates. For instance, this earthquake today occurred on the boundary of Anatolian plate, of the Arabian plate. Similarly, North Anatolian Fault System is also the boundary between Anatolian plate and the Eurasian plate. So it is about 10 millimeter per year strain accumulation is occurring on Eastern Anatolian Fault System, and which accumulates over time and it produces large, which is enough to produce a large earthquake. Interestingly, I have it in the paper a few years ago. I predicted the potential as 7.7 for this region. And the second one, 7.5, which is in the north. Actually, this is the most recent earthquake and occurred an hour ago. And even the numbers are very similar. That's very interesting. So the earthquake occurred in a region which is expected, that we call seismic gap. It means there is a gap which we expect an earthquake to happen in the near future. And both earthquakes today, large earthquakes, occurred on these seismic gaps.
So, Chris, I'll ask you to respond to that as well. Even though we are on this seismic gap, how difficult and what are the limitations to predicting earthquakes of this magnitude?
Well, it's indeed very difficult. We know that the area as a whole is prone to earthquakes, and that these earthquakes can happen with this sort of magnitude, but knowing exactly when they'll occur is much, much more difficult to say. So as Bahadir was saying, that we can identify parts of fault zones where maybe there hasn't been much seismic activity in the recent past, and that means the strain is building up, and perhaps that means there's a higher risk of earthquakes occurring in those particular areas. So we know it's a risk, but to know when it's going to happen, the exact moment, is something that we can't predict yet.
And what about this second earthquake that we have heard reported on Monday, 7.5? Is this an aftershock from the original earthquake? And when does it become a new earthquake? What differentiates between an aftershock and another earthquake?
Well, I guess it's really a question of how you want to define it. You could define it in terms of size. That aftershocks are smaller than the main event. You could describe it in terms of the amount of time. I think the significant thing about this particular event is that we've not only had the major earthquake in the early hours of Monday morning. There were then a whole series of relatively large aftershocks, I think we could call them, magnitude 4 and magnitude 5, which is quite large, but also very interestingly spread out along the whole length of the fault zone. So aftershocks are normally sort of more tightly clustered around where the original earthquake takes place.
These ones are very widespread. I mean, Diyarbakir is it's hundreds of kilometres away.
Yes.
So how unusual is that?
Well, I would say that is quite unusual. It seems the whole fault is reacting to the initial earthquake and has become active, and that may be because it's been relatively dormant for such a long period of time, and a lot of strain has accumulated, and this is triggering the release of that strain. So yes, it is unusual.
And Durmus, what does that mean for the recovery and the rescue operation? Surely that's making things very precarious.
Yes, you're right, definitely. It's really hard because now we are talking about the 9 provinces, and 5 of them is really strong affected by the earthquake. So the international community also, they offer the help for those people who are affected by the earthquake in 9 provinces. So as I said, the time is so crucial, first 72 hours. So the local capacity and the governmental capacity is so important. At the same time, the capacity of the international organizations and governments also, when they join the programs as early as possible, which means we will survive more lives, which I hope.
I'm glad you raised that issue of international support, because I did want to ask you about that. So how important is it, how necessary is it that Turkey gets very prompt but also appropriate international support?
It is really important because, the countries, they have the capacity. And then as the Chris or the Bahadir mentioned, the magnitude is not just one center. It is almost 9 provinces. So what we need more teams, more search and rescue teams, and dogs and other materials, so that we can intervene widely, and then we can try to rescue the people, because the weather conditions are really affecting the teams to intervene the rubbles and the areas. So we need the teams as many as possible, whether from the local capacity, from the international capacity, but we need more teams.
And Durmus, what about for Syria? Does international support easily reach Syria, because we've got sanctions, political divisions between countries, the EU, the United States with the Syrian regime? How difficult does that make international aid to really help the people affected there?
Yeah, this is another point. It is really hard. Already those people are affected by the war, and then they are suffering from more than 10 years. And because of this earthquake, and it affects almost more than 9 districts of the northern part of the Syria. And what I can see that, I must tell you that really there is a huge need for the international intervention, international search and rescue teams. But I don't know the authorities, how they are going to organize it. But you can see that from the films, the conditions are so hard, and the health facilities is really weak. And the search and rescue teams are so little. And then, I don't know, it is very hard to say, and really it's difficult.
Chris, here in Istanbul, for years, people have been talking about the big one. Everyone's waiting for the big one. Does this event in the eastern part of Turkey make it more or less likely that Istanbul will experience the big one?
I think it doesn't really make any difference, unfortunately. It's the risk is still the same. We know that, again, it's a place where a large earthquake can happen. Eventually there will be one, but exactly when we can't say. And because the two faults are separate, this has occurred on a different fault, the fault that runs through Istanbul. They are related to one another. But I think the fact there's been an earthquake on this fault in southeast Turkey doesn't really make a great deal of difference to the levels or the repetition of earthquake activity on the northern Anatolia fault that runs through Istanbul.
And Bahadir, what do you think with your research and your expertise in this area? How is Istanbul looking as we predict the big one?
Actually, there is a phenomenon called stress triggering. It means the transfer of stress after large earthquakes to nearby faults or segments. Actually, this is probably the thing. What happened today, the second earthquake is probably triggered by the first one, high stress transfer of the first one. But Istanbul is too far away to get affected from these earthquakes, since this stress transfer is propagates, but it also is not effective over long distances, let me say. And the second earthquake, I would like to get back to the first question actually about this. The second earthquake is an aftershock, or it is separate. There are several characteristics which relates and identify an earthquake as an aftershock. They have similar mechanism, but it is too big to be an aftershock, because we usually expect about 1 or 1.1 smaller magnitude events as aftershocks.
So you see this as a separate earthquake in and of itself, a second earthquake of that scale.
A second separate, yes, and it's probably triggered by the first one. Since 7.7 is a large earthquake, it's able to transfer large stresses to the nearby faults, And in terms of the shear strain, since the mechanisms are similar, it's likely that the second earthquake occurred due to the triggering of the first one.
Chris, if I could ask you about aftershocks, even if this second earthquake is not considered an aftershock in and of itself, we're seeing so many numerous aftershocks in such a wide area. How long do they typically last? And should people be prepared for hours, for days, or could this last for a week?
Oh, well, definitely for hours and days, and most likely for weeks. You know, one would, again, normally expect and hope that as time passes from the initial events, that the magnitudes of the aftershocks may decrease slightly, or they may become slightly less frequent. But they will continue for a long time, and in some instances, there can be subsequent earthquakes that can again be triggered by the first one that might occur several months after the initial earthquake and can have again a similar magnitude. It all depends on how the stress is building up and how it's transferred between the different faults. So yes, I think people will need to be aware of that risk for a while to come.
Durmus, if I could ask you if this is going to be ongoing for days and for weeks, the threat that is, does that change the way rescue teams look at this? Because these are very precarious rescue operations. You can't use heavy machinery. If there is the threat of aftershocks for days and even weeks, how does that impact your work?
Yeah, this is another risk you're talking about. This is, you know, already at the moment, the people now, the research and rescue teams now, they are trying to rescue the people under the rubbles. When the aftershocks shocks are continue, people, it's not easy to go under the rubbles. So if imagine that it goes for the days and weeks, it's going to be very hard for them to work under the rubbles. And then the recovery site will be start much more later. So it's about the time, it's about, I don't know, it's really hard to say. But as early as possible, if you start the recovery process, it's going to make it much more easier to people of life.
Bahadir, what advice? Oh, sorry, before I come to you, Bahadir, I just see Chris gesturing there. What would you like to respond?
Yes, I think the other thing to remember about aftershocks is the psychological effect that it has on people. You know, this major earthquake has been obviously a massive shock to people. People are displaced, and then the aftershocks can be a reminder and of the initial event and instill further feelings of insecurity. And I think that's something that people have recognized more in recent large earthquakes, is the psychological effects of continuing aftershocks as well.
And something that is going to be felt for a long time. Bahadir, we're almost running out of time, so I just want to put our final question to you with regards to advice. If these aftershocks that have been quite powerful are going to continue, what advice do you have for people who remain in those areas?
First of all, I suggest stay calm. Okay, for everybody, because we know from the previous earthquakes that the panic is one of the things that make things worse. So first of all, people should stay calm and follow the instructions of the authorities about entering a building or staying outside. Since it requires, I mean, whether the building is still safe to get inside or not, it requires lots of procedure and lots of inspection, and which cannot be determined by naked eye. So I suggest they follow the instructions, the local authorities about entering or leaving the building.
And Durmus, what advice do you have for those communities?
Yeah, as Mr. Bahadir said, we need to first stay calm. And it's not easy. The plenty of people traumatized because of the earthquake and aftershocks. And it is very important to cooperate with the local authorities and search and rescue teams. As much as we have a cooperation with those organizations and search and rescue teams, I believe we can reach the people who are under rubbles, and we can reach the people who are traumatized and affected by the earthquake.
The people, I just also, before we wrap up, you say the people that are traumatised, what kind of support is in place for people as they continue with this ongoing psychological trauma? If they have survived, they have nowhere to go.
At the moment, the Turkish authorities and the NGOs now, they are trying to organize the psychosocial programs for those people who are affected, and especially those people who are going to the schools and some other in the mosques also. So now there are psychologists and social workers are staying there, and also they are visiting the areas where they're staying, those people, and trying to support for those people to stay calm and at least to release their pains.
It is going to be a very difficult few days and weeks as Turkey and its neighbours deal with this disaster. Gentlemen, I thank you all for your time and your expertise here on The Newsmakers. And thank you to you, our audience, for watching. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It will have all the updates from our TRT World colleagues. I'm Melinda Nusafora. See you next time.